Imagine, for a second, a single digital brain that has read and understood every single scientific paper published in an entire field of science. It sounds like science fiction, right? Well, today we're diving into something called MatKG, an AI that is doing exactly that for material science. And what it's finding is knowledge that's been hiding in plain sight all along.
It all starts with a number that is just, honestly, it's hard for our human brains to even wrap our heads around. 4 million. MatKG was built by processing the text, the data, the knowledge from over 4 million scientific papers. We're not talking about a small, curated library here. This is an AI that has ingested a truly massive chunk of our collective scientific understanding.
And that really gets to the core of the problem, doesn't it? This is the central challenge for modern science. New papers and new data are being published at an absolutely staggering rate. The total volume of information is it's way beyond what any single researcher or even a huge team of researchers could ever hope to read and process.
And it gets worse, because all this knowledge isn't in one neat little library. Nope, it's scattered all over the place. You've got academic databases like Scopus and Web of Science, patent archives like PatentScope, data repositories like Figshare. It's this huge, sprawling, and totally disconnected ecosystem of information. Now, here's a really key challenge. Most of this data is what we call unstructured. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, structured data is like a perfectly organized spreadsheet. A computer can read it in a heartbeat, no problem. But most scientific knowledge isn't like that. It's unstructured. It's buried in the plain English text of an article, or in the caption of an image, or in some random table. It makes perfect sense to us, but for a machine, it's a chaotic mess.
So the takeaway here is crucial. We don't have an information problem. We're drowning in information. What we have is a connection problem. All the knowledge is out there, but it's in millions of tiny, disconnected pieces. We can't see the forest for the trees because we're missing the links between all these different ideas.
And this is where MatKG comes in. Its entire reason for existing is to build those missing connections, to construct something called a knowledge graph that can finally map out the entire landscape of material science.
So what in the world is a knowledge graph? Probably the easiest way to think about it is as a relationship map for data. It's not just a database that stores individual facts. It actually maps out how different concepts, what the AI calls entities, are connected to each other through links. It's all about the relationships. Now, the key word here, the absolute game changer, is autonomously. See, people have tried to build these graphs before, but it required huge teams of experts to manually read papers and create the connections. It was incredibly slow, incredibly expensive. MatKG, on the other hand, builds itself. It uses those powerful language models we're always hearing about to read the literature and build this entire web of knowledge completely on its own. Okay, so how does it actually work? How does an AI read 4 million papers and build a digital brain from scratch? Well, it all boils down to this really clever two-step process that, again, happens all on its own. So step 1 is all about finding the concepts. You can picture the AI reading through all 4 million papers with a set of digital highlighters. It's looking for important scientific terms and tagging them. This process is actually called named entity recognition. Then it sorts all those tagged concepts into neat little piles like materials, properties, or applications. Okay, so once it has all the concepts, step 2 is to connect the dots. This is where it actually builds the web. The AI looks at how often 2 concepts show up near each other across that entire massive library of papers. If 2 terms appear together way more often than they would by just random chance, the AI says, aha, there's a relationship here, and it draws a connection, a link between them. And the scale of this whole operation is just wow. In total, the AI identified over 80,000 unique scientific concepts. You can see here the biggest category it found was properties, over 27,000 of them, and right behind that were tens of thousands of specific chemicals and materials. So you take those 80,000 concepts and you start connecting them all based on what the AI learned. And the final result? It's a knowledge graph with over 2 million unique relationships. It is this incredibly dense, interconnected web of scientific knowledge built from the ground up entirely by a machine. Okay, but having a giant, complex map of knowledge is one thing. The real magic is what you can do with it. And this is where MatKG makes the leap from being just a passive database to being an active engine for discovery. So for example, say a researcher asks the system about a common material, like titanium dioxide. They don't just get back a long list of papers to read. They get this, An instant map showing the most statistically important connections. You can immediately see its top applications, like electrodes and catalysts, and its most studied phases. It's basically decades of research, all summarized in a few seconds.
And what's really cool is you can work backwards. Instead of starting with a material, you can start with a problem. You can ask, what's the best material for a catalyst? And the graph points you right to platinum. Or if you're working on electrodes, it tells you that the key property you should be measuring is cycling performance. It helps scientists find the right tool for the job.
But here's where things get really interesting. Take a look at this first pass at a graph for a material called bismuth telluride. The AI has pulled out its known properties from the papers it read, but you'll notice that applications node is empty. The connections just aren't explicitly written down anywhere.
This leads us to a really critical question. What happens when the answers we're looking for aren't actually spelled out in the research? Can an AI see things that aren't technically there?
And the answer, incredibly, is yes. It's through a process called link prediction. Because the AI doesn't just know individual facts, it understands the entire network, the shape and structure of all 2 million relationships. It can actually make really smart, educated guesses. It can infer connections that are missing, predicting relationships that very likely exist, even if no one has ever explicitly written them down in a paper.
And these are not just wild stabs in the dark. When the researchers tested its predictions, the results were amazing. Almost half of its top suggestions were directly correct, and another 29% were indirectly related in a meaningful way. I mean, that means that more than 3/4 of the time, the AI was making a scientifically relevant suggestion completely out of thin air.
So let's go back to that bismuth telluride graph. On the left, that's what the AI found directly in the papers, a big question mark for applications. But on the right, that's the graph after link prediction. The AI has filled in the blanks. It predicts that this material would probably be useful for things like thermoelectric devices and semiconductors. It didn't read that anywhere. It inferred it from the structure of all the other knowledge it had.
And this is the bottom line, the most important takeaway. MatKG isn't just a fancy digital filing cabinet for science. It's an active tool for discovery. It can surface these hidden connections and suggest brand new research ideas that a human might have never thought to look for.
The potential impact of this is just, it's huge. A tool like this could dramatically speed up the discovery of brand new materials. It could help us find surprising new uses for materials we already know about. It could even help guide the automated science labs of the future by pointing out novel connections hidden deep in the data.
It really leaves you with a fascinating thought. You know, for centuries, scientific discovery meant going into the lab and running a new experiment. But what tools like MatKG are showing us is that maybe, just maybe, the next wave of great breakthroughs is already here, hidden in the connections between the millions of pages we've already written. The question is no longer just what new things we can discover, but what we can rediscover.